I am a corrections officer at a county jail in northwest Alabama. I work a 12-hour night shift from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Most nights are calm, and not much happens from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. And then other nights, you're moving non-stop, and police officers are constantly bringing people in. You have a lot of DUIs and junkies on the weekends, and then anything from an FTA to an occasional murder throughout the regular work week. Anyways, like I said, most nights are calm, meaning that hours feel like days, and sometimes a single shift can make you feel like you've been here for weeks. But sometimes those calm nights are not really all that calm. We have 2 holding cells in the front of the jail, used to house inmates that have recently been booked in and are waiting to see the nurse for screening before going to general population. We have another room up front that we all call the pink room, due to the walls and ceiling being painted a hot pink color, because a former sheriff thought that hot pink was a calming color. Everyone hates this room. It's basically our drunk tank, equipped with a camera for observation and a flushable drain in the floor for any liquids that might come out of someone, if you know what I mean. One night, after lights out when everyone was asleep, I heard a loud bang in one of the holding cells, like someone was hitting or kicking the door, which would have been a normal noise if anyone would have been inside one of them. But my partner and I had moved everyone out of the 2 holding cells just a few hours ago, and no one else had come in that night. I thought it might have been the guy he was keeping in the pink room for medical observation, but when I looked over at the monitor for the camera in there, he was sound asleep on his mat on the floor. I went over to the doors of the holding cells to investigate. I lifted the heavy curtains on the window so I could see into each one, but there was no sign of anything. I figured I was just hearing things, since that noise is so commonly heard at all times of the day or night. I went back over to my desk and sat down. It was about 2:45 when I heard that noise. It was completely silent again until about 3:05. I started hearing the noise it makes when a door is unlocked from the control room. From the control room, you can unlock or open any door in the facility except for like 3 you need an actual key for. There is a door right behind the desk I sit at that leads to the kitchen and the rec yard. That was the door that sounded like it was unlocked. I radioed my partner, who was in the control room, and asked if she had unlocked the door. She said she hadn't touched the computer since I asked her to let me outside and vape like 2 hours ago. Again, I thought, it was a common noise to be heard, the silence is just playing tricks on me. But then I heard it again. Except this time, it sounded like the front door. I looked over at the monitors for the front door and saw nothing. But on the monitor for the pink room, I could see the screen starting to get fuzzy like static. Then it went completely black for a few seconds. When the camera came back on, the inmate was sleeping in the same spot, but everything he had in there with him, his cup, shoes, blanket, was scattered across the whole room. I would have heard him moving and throwing things, but it was completely quiet for those few seconds that the camera was black. After that, I decided I didn't want to be alone anymore, and I went up to the control room with my partner and started telling her what was going on. After I told her about the doors unlocking and locking, and about the guy's stuff in the pink room, she just laughed and said it must have been Christine. My partner has been working here for 5 years now, and she told me that Christine was an inmate that had died in the old jail next door, and that the reason she haunts this jail is because the buildings are connected. She told me about numerous things that have happened while she was on shift, including actual sightings of the ghost that she called Christine. She said that Christine has gray hair down to her shoulders, wearing a white nightgown. She also said that Christine can be seen walking down hallways on the cameras, inside the cells with her hands on the bars looking through them, and sometimes you can see her face from the windows outside. I'll post anything else weird that happens to me on the job here at my haunted jail. I was a police officer back in the early 90s, and I have a few stories that some would consider disturbing or terrifying. I figure, however, that this story was one of my favorite to tell people, mostly because of how weird and terrifying the situation was. This isn't the story that got me to quit the force, but it is one of those stories that made me certainly second guess what I was doing. Again, this was back in the early 90s, simpler times by almost every measure. It was late in the evening, I think around 8 or 9 p.m. My partner and I were driving around some neighborhoods, just patrolling and making sure that people weren't out breaking the law. Honestly, my hometown was a pretty small one, so it wasn't like our patrolling was busy. We were pretty much just enjoying the autumn air. We had gone through the McDonald's drive-thru and gotten a late dinner, something we weren't really supposed to do, but again, it was a boring night, and we had been on for a few hours at this point. We had just pulled into the lot to start eating when the dispatcher came in over the radio. She had said that someone had just called in to report what they thought was agonized screaming, and that through their window, it looked like their neighbors had been in a physical altercation. It sounded like the husband had gotten drunk, and he and his wife had been fighting, and then he had gotten physical. The location that the dispatcher mentioned was only a couple of blocks away, so my partner took the radio, told her that we would take it, and got the address confirmed. I was a little annoyed that we weren't going to be able to finish eating before it all got cold, but I understood the seriousness of the call. Abuse isn't something to just brush off, especially as a police officer. I wrapped my sandwich, dropped it back in the bag, shifted the car into reverse, and we got back on the road toward the house. I remember my partner and I talking about how we would handle it, and we decided that we would just be assertive, and most likely end up having to take the man to jail for the night so we could sober up, and talk to her about getting some help, and try to convince her to get out of the relationship. As a police officer, these situations aren't easy. You can't really tell people what to do, but you can give them suggestions. They typically never take them. Anyway, we pulled up to the front of the house and stepped out of the car. The neighbor saw that we had gotten there, and he came rushing over to us. He told us that he was the one who called us. I remember he was freaking out and telling us that he heard the wife screaming and he heard the man yelling incoherently. We asked the normal questions, whether or not he saw the man with a weapon, if he knew much about the man, if he knew he had any guns or anything like that. We got the information and thanked him for his time, then went over to the house. I lifted my hand to knock on the door, and we waited for a few moments. I leaned in toward the door and listened for anything. It was fairly quiet in the house. I couldn't hear any screaming or anyone yelling. I knocked again and announced that I was with the police, hoping that maybe that would coax him into coming out and talking to us. But again, it was silent. My partner stepped down from the doorstep and started looking at the side of the house. He motioned that he was going to go to the side and look in through the window. I nodded and gave the door a third knock. After a few moments of me just standing there, my partner came back around the corner in a rush. He tells me that he saw someone on the floor through the window and that we needed to get in there right away. I nodded, grabbed my radio and told dispatch that we were going to attempt to enter the property. Once they confirmed and mentioned they were sending backup our way, we drew our weapons and mentally prepared for what was going to be inside that house. I reached for the doorknob and turned it. Much to my surprise, it was unlocked. I nodded toward my partner and pushed the door open. As I stepped in, I once again announced that we were the police and then stated that we were entering the property. And, once again, the entire house was silent. We cleared the entrance and kept on into the house. Everything was normal until we got to one of the side rooms. I entered first and saw the man in question. He was sitting on the couch with his legs curled up. He was rocking back and forth and mumbling incoherently to himself. My guess was that this was the man in the altercation, but he looked like he was on something much harder than alcohol. I paused and asked him what was going on, and then asked if he needed help. He completely ignored me and kept rocking back and forth. Because he seemed like he was tweaking, and because I could see what appeared to be blood on his shirt, I kept my weapon down but ready just in case. I stepped a bit further into the room and glanced around the corner. That's the exact moment that the weight of this situation actually hit me. I thought with the fact that the man was tweaking and the information given by the neighbor, it was going to be at best a domestic disturbance and at worst an assault and battery. Instead, we walked straight into an unexpected murder scene, and one that was completely off the wall. Off to the side of the living room was the woman's body with a number of candles that were lit and what looked like a pentagram carved into the floor around her. That was also when I noticed there was a knife sticking out of her throat, and the amount of blood that had pooled around her head. Upon seeing the state of the body, I immediately sprung into action and stepped over to the guy. I pulled him up and turned him around to put cuffs on him. Much to my surprise, he didn't resist whatsoever. He literally moved with me and put his hands behind his back and followed my every command. I told my partner to call it in and that we needed to get out of the house so as to not disturb any evidence. We got out, I threw the guy in the back of our squad car, and I was just standing there trying to piece together the situation. How the hell had an argument turned into what looked like a ritual killing? I leaned down and was just staring at the guy. His eyes were wide and he was shaking, almost like he was terrified of what had just happened. Seeing as how now was a good opportunity to ask what the hell he had been doing, I read him his rights and then immediately asked what the hell we had just walked into. He looked at me without even a blink and said, "I killed my wife." I basically stared at him with a dumbfounded look and then asked him why he killed his wife. Once again, without hesitation, he tells me, "Satan told me I had to. He said he needed a sacrifice, so I strangled her." I was quite confused by this statement, as I had clearly seen that he had stabbed her in the neck. I pressed him a little more about that, and he responded with, "Well, I needed to cut off her head to complete the sacrifice, but there was so much blood. I didn't think she would bleed if I did it after she was dead. That's why I strangled her first. I can't stand the sight of blood." This statement, and the whole situation really, was just bizarre. I slowly shut the door and turned back to stare at the house. This man that had the willingness to strangle his wife to death and then attempt to decapitate her was put off by the sight of blood. After that, I was pretty much done with him and done with thinking about the situation. I let the crime scene people do their job, explained everything to my superiors, and gave my statements and interviewed the neighbors again, basically just dotting my I's and crossing my T's. This was probably the most horrifying situation I had ever been on in the line of duty, and I don't think any of my other stories could top this one. Thankfully, we never had another murder with that level of intensity while I was on the force. I did end up quitting and moving on to something a little more desk-oriented, but that night was probably the most terrified I had ever been as a police officer. Sup, my fellow paranormal fanatics. So, this happened to me and a few other guys about 2 weeks ago. I'm a career firefighter in Southwest Florida, and we respond pretty regularly to medical alarm activations. Tonight, we were dispatched along with EMS to a medical alarm activation. Once on scene, we noted a small mobile home with no cars and no lights on. So we did our standard knock on the front door, and we can clearly hear a woman calling for help. It was clear enough to the point that we were able to narrow down the room she was in from the outside. All the doors were locked, so myself and my partner climbed through a window and searched the entire house only to find absolutely no one. The creepiest part of it is, afterwards we talked to the EMS guys who stayed outside and talked with her. They said they were talking with her until they heard us in the same room. Definitely a spine-chilling call. Any thoughts? As a little update, I did some research, and from what I gathered, the house had been unoccupied for a few months now. Also, I don't know if this is connected or not, but last night while on duty, I was in the bay, where we keep the trucks, and I was on the phone when all of the lights shut off randomly. I was the only one out there, and if someone opened a door, I would hear it, no doubt. Lights turning off didn't really freak me out all that much, but when I was walking across the bay to turn them all back on, I saw a figure standing by the ice machine out of the corner of my eye, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared to me. I don't really know what to make of all this, so any and all input or advice would be appreciated. So I was a wildland firefighter back in the day in Arizona. I worked in a forest that was generally popular with a lot of recreation in the northern portion, but I worked on the southern portion of the forest that was really remote. It barely had any roads or campgrounds, so if you wanted to recreate there, you had to work for it. The fire crew I was on had 2 duty stations, one in the small town where the rest of the forest employees worked out of, and one that was about 2.5 hours away up a really windy, mountainous road. The remote duty station had an old Forest Service ranger station, and a newer double-wide trailer that was recently put in. When I worked at this place, it had no cell reception. When my crew and I weren't working, we were playing horseshoes and watching movies. They did eventually add a cell phone booster, which sadly made people play on their phones, but I digress. So, for my creepy story, I want to keep it pretty simple, but my supervisor from that crew had experienced some weird things as well working up there. There was one night he told me he was cowboy camping, sleeping outside with no tent, and he kept getting a weird mucusy drop of liquid on his face. He kept looking around and even yelling, and no one was around him. He told me he wasn't below any trees, so he knew it wasn't tree sap. He never slept outside there ever again, which leads me to believe that he was telling the truth. Now, for my story. I have had other interesting experiences at that remote duty station, but this one was scary. It was the night of July 4th, and we weren't on a fire, so the crew was playing horseshoes and just having a good time. Everyone went to bed pretty early because we were going to have a point hike the next day. I had my own small room in the double-wide trailer, and my bed was situated next to a big window. I started dozing off, but felt awake still. And then I hear one of my coworkers outside my window asking me to come outside. I was lying on my side facing the window, and I didn't look up, but I felt their presence by the window. It felt as though something tall was looming over me from outside. They kept beckoning me, and I just said no. Pretty quickly, their voice started changing to a deeper, raspier, angrier voice. They started cursing at me, saying, "Get the hell outside." I just froze. It was sort of a demonic voice. I lay frozen, not moving while they yelled at me. Eventually, it stopped and I fell asleep. I woke up the next day and wanted to ask my coworker if he was standing outside my window, but it felt too weird. Perhaps this was a mild form of sleep paralysis, but it was still weird to me. I'm a sheriff's deputy in a fairly busy county. Along with this job comes the unfortunate familiarity with what a decomposing human body smells like. To me, It's very similar to an animal carcass, but with a much sweeter odor. Not sweet in the sense that I enjoy it, hell no. That smell normally means a bad night for me, and another gruesome memory to add to my catalog of things I would rather forget. With that out of the way, I'll get to what happened. Last night, I was patrolling a geographically isolated area of the county, which is very large and sparsely populated. Having completed the hour-long trek to the northwestern county line, I began driving through the mountains back towards civilization. About 25 miles from town, or the closest semblance thereof, I hit a straight stretch of highway through a wide valley. Since the weather was nice, I had my windows rolled down. As I passed the entrance of an old logging road, that familiar smell of sweet rot suddenly filled my car. It wasn't just a whiff, it was a cloud of it filling the cab, as if there was a week-old human corpse sitting in the front seat next to me. It was all too familiar, but this time, there was something else that I couldn't place. It lingered for a few moments, and then went away just as quickly as it had entered. Realizing what I had just smelled, my heart sank and I pulled over to the side of the road. I told myself it was just a dead animal in the ditch and that my mind was playing tricks on me. I turned my car around and slowly drove back toward the logging road. The closer I got to it, the smell became stronger, and I grew more certain that I was about to find a body. Holding on to a shred of hope that I was wrong, I parked my unit on the side of the highway just before the dirt road. I radioed to dispatch, told them my location, and that I would be out of my unit for a moment. I didn't say why, to avoid an awkward disregard on a possible body on the side of the road. I shined my flashlight in the ditch, and into the encroaching briars and weeds, as I walked closer to where I believed the source of the smell was. Once I was a few yards away from the dirt road, I saw an opening of a concrete culvert going under the highway. At this point, the smell was nearly as strong as it was when I had first passed. The opening of the culvert was about 3 feet in diameter, but large enough to hide a body inside. I cursed, held my breath, and leaned over, then shined my light inside. It was an empty tunnel, stretching the width of the highway. Somewhat relieved, I stood and looked around. It smelled as if I was standing on top of whatever was emitting that odor. I searched around the brush for a moment, but found nothing. Thinking the origin might be on the other side of the highway, I crossed to the other ditch and continued searching. As I walked away from the other side of the road, the smell grew faint. I stopped at the opposite end of the culvert and peeked inside just to double check. The odor was nearly gone at this point. I stood up and checked my surroundings when I heard a crack in the brush behind me, and the smell engulfed me and was even stronger than before. Thinking for a moment that the wind must have shifted, I froze when I realized that the air was dead still. Whether it was fear or something else, a shiver went down my spine. In the distance, I saw headlights coming down the highway. As the car came near me, the odor seemed to move away further into the bushes toward where I had heard the crack. The car stopped, and the passenger rolled down the window and asked if I was all right. I lied and told him I was. I thanked him for checking and walked briskly to my car as they drove away. I got the hell away from there. Once I was able to get cell service, I called my friend who was patrolling the opposite side of the county. I explained what happened, trying to not let on that I was spooked. Once I was done, he paused for a moment and asked about the unusual hint of something which accompanied the smell. He asked if it was sulfur, and then I put 2 and 2 together. It was sulfur that I had smelled. I asked if he thought I had found a demon in the middle of nowhere, to which he responded with a concerned yes. A little background on this guy: he is the son of a missionary and has been all around the world. He has smelled this before, and told me that it was a very concerning experience. This spooked me even more because his response was very out of character for him. I know from experience that this community is very resourceful and provides helpful feedback. So, what the hell happened? Has anyone had anything even remotely similar occur to them? There's always the chance of a very scientific explanation, and I hope that one is out there that could explain it away. If you're familiar with my previous posts, you know that I've had paranormal encounters in the past, which included an encounter with a possible possession, so I'm open to any advice or guidance. I know how to fight criminals. An evil spirit? Not so much. To answer the question that I know is coming, yes, I can go back there tonight when I go to work. If anyone wants pictures, recordings, or anything else, let me know. As an update, I just arrived back in town from that area. The smell is completely gone, and nothing occurred besides the apprehension of my returning. So I've been a career paramedic, but this happened when I had only been one for about 5 years. This has never left me to this day, and I kid you not, it happened exactly like this. I was driving home on a rural highway one rainy afternoon. It was really pouring and traffic had slowed to about 50 miles per hour. I was following two vehicles, and we rounded a bend in the road as a small sports car on the opposite side crossed the center line and hit the small SUV that was leading the three of us vehicles on my side of the road. I immediately pulled over and called 911. It was a bad one. I got out to check on everyone. There was a wailing coming from the SUV on the side of the road. That's always a good thing, because people are breathing. So I went down into the field past the ditch to check on the sports car. There were two young guys in that car. The force of the impact had driven the engine to where the front passenger seat should be. The passenger was still buckled, his crumpled hand grabbing the oh crap handle overhead. The entire section of car shoved into the backseat area. The back of the car had peeled away, as had the passenger's top of his head. His jawbone jutted out, raw and jagged. He was clearly deceased, but I felt for a pulse anyway, all while listening to the gasping, ragged, dragging breaths of the driver. No pulse on the passenger. I tried to figure out how to deal with the driver, but there was nothing I could do. The car had literally wrapped around him, and it would take an extraction team time to get him out. Listening to his dying breathing, I apologized out loud to him that I couldn't do any more. I told him I was sorry to leave him, but the others needed my help too. In my heart, I knew he would never make it. So I went to render aid where it was needed. In a triage, we call this black tagging, a patient who isn't going to survive. I did what I could for the family in the SUV. Emergency medical people and fire services got to the scene and took over. The entire family had injuries, but all survived. The mother had permanent brain damage and lost one of her eyes. But the whole day, those two guys in the red sports car stayed on my mind. That night, I was home alone and getting ready for bed with the bedside lamp on, and I heard something in the hallway. It got louder as it came closer down the dark hallway toward my open door. It was like a thump, drag, thump, drag. I absolutely froze. A broken hand curled around the frame of my doorway, and then that kid from the passenger seat was just standing there, busted up like he was in the car. I'm totally serious. He looked at me, and I can't recall the exact words of what he said, but it was something along the lines of, Hey, my friend wants you to know that he understands. He wants you to know he's okay. We both are. Thanks for trying." He stood there for a few more seconds, just looking at me. And then he stepped back into the shadows, let go of the doorframe, and I listened to him drag back down the hallway into nothing. I turned on every damn light that I could. I slept with the lights on for 2 full weeks. I clipped out their death notices from the paper later that week. Turns out, they were both high school seniors, on their way home from a wrestling tournament. Their car hydroplaned from what the investigation determined. I'd never have recognized the blonde-headed kid had he come to me at his healthy, unwrecked self. It freaked me the hell out that he came to me busted up. I still have the newspaper clippings, but I'll never forget them nor the ghastly visit. Anyways, that's my experience. I've seen a lot of stuff in my 29-year career, but nothing quite that visceral before, nor since. Hey there, friends. I hope you're having a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed this collection of In the Line of Duty stories. These are creepy as hell, in my opinion. And, yeah, thank you to everyone who is a first responder or everyone who works in the line of duty that's like this. The police, firefighters, EMTs, corrections officers, everyone. Honestly, you guys do amazing work for people out there. So again, thank you. If you did enjoy the video, please do hit that thumbs up button. And if you are new to the channel, it would mean a lot to me if you would hit that subscribe button and that bell. That helps my channel grow, and this is something I'm trying to really grow into something more than what it is. You can also leave me a comment, let me know how you're doing. I'd love to hear from you, and I'd love to just discuss things with you if you have something to talk about. Down in the description, you'll find a page where you can submit a story to me if you have one for me to read, and I would really appreciate that as it helps me have more content for my channel, which helps me make more videos. I'm sure you get the picture. All that said, friends, I hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next video, but until then, sleep well.